it's Kristen, and this is the Off the Top of Your Head tag. This was created, I think, by the Library Mouse, and the premise of it is that you just answer these questions off the top of your head. So I've got them on my computer down here, but I've not really thought about them because I'm supposed to give my answers off the top of my head. So, question 1. What was your favourite picture book as a child? Gosh, I remember liking The Rainbow Fish purely for the pictures, because on the pages the scales were actually shiny and it was really fun to look at. And I also liked Elmer because again I liked the patchwork elephant drawings. And I remember liking, oh gosh, what was it called? But it had a lot of things you could take out. So it would be a letter was sent and you take out the little letter. And so I remember liking that. And I liked that as well because it was elements of all these different fairy tales, but set as if all these fairy tales existed in the same world. And it was about all the different characters who lived in the fairy tale world getting their invitations. And so you'd see I think the Three Bears, maybe Little Red Riding Hood. I can't remember if those are the exact characters, but throughout, you met the different characters in this one world, which I really enjoyed. Question 2, what series did you love as a child? I remember really enjoying the Judy Moody series. Loved that series. I reread each of those books so many times. I feel for me, when I was a younger reader getting into reading myself, it was Judy Moody and it was Molly Moon. Molly Moon's Incredible Book of Hypnotism. Really liked those. And also the series of Unfortunate Events. That series slaps. Such a good series. I really liked it because I learned a lot of words from reading it, because Lemony Snicket didn't shy away from using big words and then explaining in the book what those words meant. And so I feel I learned a lot from that series. It was fun, there were fun characters, fun settings, and it was the first, I think, really big series that I read entirely by myself. Because other book series, my mum used to read to us until we got old enough to read for ourselves. The Harry Potter books, they were a really big part of my childhood, but I'm not going to talk about them any more than this because fuck J.K. Rowling. I don't look back fondly on that series, so I'm not counting it. So yeah, Judy Moody, Molly Moon, and then Series of Unfortunate Events. I feel were the pivotal big sort of younger childhood before I got into my teen reading. Question 3, the worst book you have read or tried to read. Worst in what way? There was a book I read, I can't remember the name of it, that I got out from the library a few years ago, and it was about survivors who woke up on an island that was surrounded by sharks, and they had to work out why they were on the island and stuff like that. And I thought that sounded really fun. Love a little shark moment. Terrified of the ocean, but I liked the premise, and I like the whole we're survivors, we've got to work out together what's going on. But I thought it was so badly written. There was so much unnecessary swearing, and I'm someone who swears, and that book was too much for me. And they just characters would drop the N-word, and the author was not a black man, they were white, and the characters who were saying those words were, I think there was one character who was black who used that language, and then other characters who were not black who also used that language, and that was a bad book. Was not entertaining. I cannot remember the name of it or the name of the author, but that was one of the worst books I've ever read. It was terrible. There was also a romance book that I had on my Kindle that I downloaded for free because it was like a Scottish historical romance, which I was interested in. And then it was really terribly written. And there was a whole scene where the main female character was like in bed sleeping and like sort of having a sexy dream about the male main character, and then wakes up to find that he was actually like doing stuff to her in her sleep. And I was just like, what the fuck? And it was treated as like romantic, and I was like, absolutely not. That was also just terribly written, and had problematic elements. So nah, not here for it. Can't remember the name of it. Like, wrote a scathing review on Goodreads and then just sort of like deleted that from my memory until now. Question 4, your favourite reading or book memory? I don't know. Again, I guess like going back to when my mum used to read to us, I remember like points in like summer holidays where we'd put like picnic blankets out in the garden and we'd like have a cup of like squash or something, and like my brother and I and my sister, who's a bit younger than us, so probably wasn't paying as much attention, would all sit outside in the garden. My parents would sit outside, my dad would read the newspaper, and my mum would read story to us. So that's nice, that's sweet. But in like more recent years, I think it's just when I feel like I have a really productive reading week. So like recently there was like a 2-week period where I read like 5 books in 2 weeks. I had the week off work and I just read so much, and I read some really good books that like I enjoyed. Like everything was like 3.5 stars or above, so like that was really fun. And I got a bunch of like physical books off my TBR. Last October I had a really good time reading. Like the whole month I was playing like Spookopoly-thon, and I read some really great autumnal horror, supernatural, like spooky little books, and that was just, yeah, really fun. Felt very like atmospheric. Yeah, I don't like, sentimentally I guess it's like my mum reading to us when we were younger. But yeah, now I just like when I have maybe like a little bit of time off work, I really get into a book. I get some things off my physical TBR, so I feel like semi-productive. I don't know. I can't think of anything else that like really stands out to me. Yeah, that's that's my answer, I guess. Number 5, a book you loved as a movie. There's lots of books I love as movies where I think like the book is still better but the movie's good. And there are books and movies that I think like I like them both and I think they are on like a sort of similar level. And then there are a couple of books and movies where I think the movie's better than the book. I'm gonna be really controversial and say The Princess Bride. I love The Princess Bride movie. The book was okay. I like the movie more than I like the book. So that is great. Also, The Princess Diaries. I loved the Princess Diaries series. Reread that series so many times when I was like getting into my teen books. And I think I watched The Princess Diaries before I read the books. They are very different. I think I watched the first movie, maybe also the second movie, then read the books, and I loved them both for very different reasons as like 2 separate entities. Because other than the basic premise of teenage girl discovers she's actually a princess and has to like come to terms with that and learn how to be a princess, they're just not the same. There are characters that like exist in one and not the other. Pretty pivotal things, like in the movies her dad is dead. In the books he's not. In the movies her gran is the wonderful, lovely, ever lovable Julie Andrews. In the books her gran's a bitch. So I think of The Princess Diaries as like an entity very fondly. I think of the books and the movies as like two separate things. Again, like the books, she like dates a couple of people, but like Michael is her like end game. In the movies, he's in the first movie, and then she gets together with Chris Pine because he's Chris Pine, you know. But yeah, love The Princess Diaries, love The Princess Bride, all the princesses. Number 6, a book you wish they would make into a movie. Oh gosh. If done well, I would love a like really intense fantasy series of the Fallen Gods trilogy, Godkiller, Sunbringer, and Faithbreaker. I read that earlier this year by Hannah Kaner, and it's such a good trilogy. I loved it. I loved the world building. I loved the whole like idea of the gods. I loved the characters. I loved how queer it was. I loved the fight scenes. I loved the relationships between the characters. That was a great series. I think it would be really interesting as a TV series, but I really like that series, so I don't know how I would feel if they ever actually did adapt it, because I'd be like, that's not how I pictured that. But I think it could make an interesting series, so I'm gonna say, yeah, the Fallen Gods trilogy. However, I do definitely think of that more as like a TV series adaptation rather than a movie adaptation. Movie wise, what would I think would be fun? Oh, You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kalynn Bayron, I think would make such a fun slasher film. I love the slasher vibes of the book. But as I was reading it, I was like, I can really picture this in my head. I thought that book was okay. Like, I enjoyed it. I had a good time reading it. I didn't think it was like mind-blowing or the best thing I've ever read, but I had a good time with it. But I think it would make a very fun slasher film, and I do love a slasher film. So yeah, You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight, movie wise, I think could be a really enjoyable watch. Number 7, a book character that you would like as a friend. I don't know, there's lots of characters I like reading about that I think would be good good to have a conversation with, but I don't really know. I think Teddy from the Rebel Blue Ranch series, I really like her as a character. I think she's very caring, very loving, very loyal, which would be nice to have as a friend. But she's also like got a bit of oomph about her. She's quite a fierce, fun character, which is something I'm not. I don't know. She's very like, she's willing to like get out there. She'll like be like the life and soul of the party. And so I think that would be a fun element in a friend. I think having friends that like push you out of your comfort zone or like make you join in with the fun are good to have if you're not naturally inclined that way. So I think Teddy would be fun. And in that same vein, I can't think of her name, but the book, The Kiss Curse, in the like first book's the X Hex, the second book's The Kiss Curse, and the main character in The Kiss Curse I really like. What is her name? Gwyn. Gwyn? Yes, Gwyn. For a similar reason. She gives me like similar vibes to Teddy. She's very quirky, very fun, very like willing to have a good time, but also very caring of like her family and her friends. So yeah, someone like that, someone who's just like nice. Question 8. A place you want to visit because of a book you read. Ooh, okay. I'm gonna have to look at my shelves. Where would I like to visit? I don't necessarily actually want to visit here, but I do like the way that in the Rebel Blue Ranch romance series, the setting is described. I think that takes place in Wyoming, but like all the mountains and the like open land, I really like that. I guess like very different, but in the same vein. Whenever I read like historical romances set in like Scotland, in like the Highlands, it just makes me want to visit there. I have been to Scotland before, and I have been to like slightly more remote areas, where it's just like open fields and then like a loch nearby and lots of like hills and stuff. But reading that in historical romance really makes me like want a secluded secluded area to stay with just like nature around me. I really can't think of like another another answer for this looking at my shelves. Yeah, I'm not sure. Those are my answers. Just being in nature. Question 9, a non-fiction book you would recommend. Gosh, non-fiction. What have I read this year that I've really enjoyed? I liked This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. I did that mostly on audio, and I think it worked on audio because I think on like reading it physically, it's like quite a lot of information to take in. So on audio, I just found it like slightly more digestible. That's all about like climate change and capitalism and how those two things like go hand in hand. Oh no, yes, that, but also earlier this year I read Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates after like putting off reading it for so fucking long. But that book was so good. Again, very intense to read because it talked about sexism, patriarchy, misogyny, and everything to do with that in terms of like women's roles in society that we are like sort of forced into, and naturally when we're discussing things like that, there is a lot about like sexual assault and rape and things like that, which was really tough to read, but it was so informative. I found it so interesting. I think if I'd read it when I was younger, it would have been like a 5-star read for me. As an adult, I already knew a lot of the stuff that Laura Bates was talking about, but to like someone getting into learning about feminism and stuff, I would absolutely recommend Everyday Sexism. And then for like just people in general, like read Laura Bates. I think she's writes in a really accessible way. So yes, those are the non-fiction books I would recommend. Question 10, final question. If you could hang out with an author all day, who would you pick and why? Oh, I don't know. Laura Bates, I guess, because I really liked the sort of conversational way she wrote her book while also being very like informative and interesting. And I think she would be great to have conversations with. But if I was wanting to hang out with people for fun, I went to an event for the final book in the God Killer trilogy and saw Hannah Kaner talking, and she seemed really cool. She seemed really chill. In the same vein as that, last year I went to an event with Jennifer Saint and Lucy Holland. Jennifer Saint writes like Greek mythology stuff. Lucy Holland writes a lot of like folklore retellings, and they talked about such interesting things. And also I went to an event before that with Natalie Haynes, and she was very funny and just so interesting to hear her talk. So I feel like I couldn't necessarily pick an author that I've not seen talking before, because like, I mean, obviously, you know, everyone puts on a show when they're doing events like that. You don't necessarily get the real person in the way that we all perform differently in different parts of our lives. But from having seen Natalie Haynes, Lucy Holland, Jennifer Saint, Hannah Kaner in person talking, they all seemed really interesting. They all seemed really nice. So I feel like any one of them would be really interesting to hang out with for a day. And all the books they write, like mythology, fantasy, folklore, that is very much like what I'm into. So I think talking to any of them would be really interesting, and they were also, yeah, quite entertaining, quite funny. So good vibes, I feel. And that is it for this tag. Let me know your answers to any of these questions down below, and I'll see you soon with another video. Bye!